It's like poison for me. This is what some clients feel like when they start to reintroduce their known IBS trigger foods. Food restriction in IBS and SIBO is really common. Most people I work with are avoiding certain types of foods. Maybe you're avoiding dairy and gluten or sugar and alcohol and caffeine and so many things. It's normal to try and modify your diet when you have digestive symptoms, but what point does it turn into a problem? That is what we're going to go through in this episode of the Inside Knowledge podcast. I'm going to be explaining a bit about how you can identify your food fears and, most importantly, how you can start to overcome them. Hello, welcome to episode 104 of the Inside Knowledge podcast for people with IBS. I'm Anna Mapson. This week's episode is all about food fear in IBS and SIBO. And so for people who have a real aversion to eating based on the fear of the consequences, what happens when you eat these foods, so you're avoiding more and more foods. This was a topic that has been requested by my email audience when I surveyed them about what topics they'd like to hear more about. So if you suggested it to me, this episode is for you. It's a difficult topic and it's much more complicated than just saying you need to eat more, because most people I work with, they know they need to eat more. They just don't know how to reintroduce the foods. So today I'm going to talk a bit about how to identify if food fear has got to the stage where it's becoming a problem for you. And then we're going to go through the first kind of initial steps to making some changes. Listening to this episode will not solve your food fear. However, I hope it will just give you the first steps in order to go and try and do something about it. I started the introduction by saying, I think this food is poison for me. And this is the exact words that a client used to me earlier in the year. And it's definitely the vibe of a lot of clients in the past. So particularly with foods like gluten and dairy that you might have been avoiding for a really long time, these can feel super scary. But I also want to talk about today the just general food fear because of the way that it can creep into your life and really start to take over. So we know that the more you avoid food, the more you start to think about it and obsess about it. And the more food rules that you have, the more food tends to rule your life. Now, I know most people with IBS, and maybe you are listening right now, have very good reasons why you have excluded more and more foods. Every time you have a bad meal, you want to try and avoid that horrific experience. So you stop eating those foods. So often the amount of foods you're avoiding is more than what's reasonable for your digestive condition. The reason you maybe have come to the point where you've got so many foods you're cutting out is because you don't really understand the triggers. So sometimes a food can have a bad impact on your digestion, and other times it won't have the same impact. And so what we need to pick apart a little bit is, was it the actual food that caused the problem, or was it another trigger, another situation that caused you to react to that meal at that moment? This is the topic that I covered in episode 100, which is just called Gut Health Advice. And these are some of my most repeated phrases. The reason I've mentioned that now is that one of the things that's important to think about every time you have a bad experience is, what else could have caused this symptom? Was it that you haven't slept well, you're particularly stressed, you've been eating in a rush, you've been skipping meals? Like, all of those things have a negative impact on your digestion as well. And so if you haven't done all of those kind of behaviours, you may well tolerate foods that you couldn't tolerate in this particular occasion. So what I'm talking about today is when you've got a restriction that is over and above what would be considered reasonable or normal for a person with IBS or SIBO. So how might you know if this is a problem for you? Well, some of the behaviours that you might recognise in yourself is if you are avoiding a lot of foods and feeling a lot of fear about eating, would be not eating when you're hungry, thinking about food all the time and thinking about what you can and can't eat, having a lot of worry about food and whether it is impacting your digestion. A lot of people I work with are caught in between two opposing thoughts. One is, I need to eat well so that I can be better and so that I can feed up my good microbes. And at the same time, I can't eat these foods because they make me feel bad. And so you're still really stuck in between these two opposing views, and it can feel very confusing. The other behaviours that you might notice would be feeling full very quickly after you've been eating. Now, this is very common when you are restricting volume and variety. Two reasons. One is when you're eating the same foods all the time on repeat, you get very bored of them and you don't have much joy in eating. You don't really look forward to your meals. It just becomes very repetitive, and the only safe foods you can eat, you don't have a taste for them anymore. So you start to reduce volume. And then when you reduce volume, your stomach can shrink a little bit and you just feel full very, very quickly. So those are the kind of behaviours that you might notice. One of the key ones is this obsession with food and your digestion, and for it taking up a huge part of your day, the headspace that it takes up, thinking of the logistics of what you can and can't eat, particularly if you are going out. It's when you can eat, what kind of food you will be able to eat, and worrying about the consequences of what happens if you eat a food that's not in your safe foods list. Now, the consequences of those kind of behaviours is that your stomach shrinks. I mentioned that just now. So generally when we eat less food, our stomach just isn't used to large volumes of food. And when you do eat, you feel full pretty quickly. Now, this may still affect you even if you have loose stools and you have fast moving transit time. So you may still have motility issues in the small intestine, and that is different to the peristalsis of food through the gut. The motility that we're talking about is the migrating motor complex, which is like an impulse that moves through the gut, cleaning up the small intestine. It gets rid of debris, old food, dead cells, bits of bacteria that you don't need, and it sweeps them out and cleans them away. If you don't have this process working very effectively, then it can lead to SIBO, small intestine bacterial overgrowth. Okay. So that's one issue, is motility issue in the small intestine, and that can happen if you're not eating regularly. You may also find as a consequence that you're becoming less hungry, so you don't actually fancy food very often and you don't really feel like eating, you just know that you have to eat. Another thing that a lot of people say to me is, if I didn't have to eat, I wouldn't bother. I would just prefer not to eat because I don't like food anymore, and I've got such a bad relationship with food that I don't want to eat anymore. And because of the restriction and the repetition of the same foods, this can lead to increased sensitivity to textures, like smells. And so you can start to become put off the look and the smell of the food because you are so bored of it. There are other nutritional consequences of not eating. And so we've got the behaviours, then you've got the consequences, and then this is going to lead to problems. So some of the problems that you might see are unintentional weight loss or an inability to put on weight even when you are trying. Perhaps you have nutrient deficiencies, and this is from reduction in food variety. Typically things like B12 intake, iron are very low in a lot of people when you're over restricting your foods, and other nutritional deficiencies as well, possibly. But those can then all lead to further rigidity of thinking, so that you're actually becoming more obsessed with food and more fearful. Because fear is such a strong emotion, it can really increase the more that you avoid the foods, weirdly. So often what you might find is when you avoid foods for a really long time, you fear them even more. And this is because you're not giving your body a chance to test out whether it's actually true that you have got a problem with these foods. So the fear, as I mentioned, these fear associations with the food, they're not always reliable. So even if you did get diarrhea after eating a certain food on a certain occasion, There could have been other things that weren't related to the food that were the culprit. And the more you avoid these foods on that basis, the less you're giving yourself a chance to disprove your theory. So your brain is doing an excellent job of keeping you safe. It's trying to help you avoid these horrible situations where you're in pain, you're bloated, you feel embarrassed, maybe really smelly gas that just feels so awkward. And all of these things are contributing to the need to avoid that situation again. You don't want to be in that situation again. So your brain is very rightly telling you, don't eat that food. That was a bad experience for us. So far, I've been talking about food fear that could apply to IBS or SIBO. But particularly in SIBO, people have another added layer of worry that any carbohydrates or anything that they eat with any glucose in it at all will be feeding the SIBO bacteria and increasing the amount of bacteria that they have got. So this is really important that you understand that diet alone does not cause SIBO. And diet will not solve SIBO. So if you know that you have a small intestine bacterial overgrowth, then you need to treat it. And the only ways you can do that is through antibiotics, certain antimicrobial supplements, or the elemental diet. There is no other diet that you can do that will 100% starve the bacteria out enough to reduce their numbers. The elemental diet is really different because it's a complete meal in a shake and you follow that with no food at all for 2 weeks. This is why it's kind of challenging, and in the UK a doctor should be prescribing that for you. So you shouldn't necessarily put yourself on an elemental diet without some medical supervision. It's another added layer, I think, that people with SIBO have, that you are going to be making your situation worse and you're worried about the impact on the bugs. What we do know is that diet in SIBO can manage your symptoms. It can help you reduce your bloating, maybe reduce diarrhea, but it won't be solving the problem of SIBO. So it's really important to eat as wide a diet as you can tolerate, rather than sticking to rigid food guidelines like this biphasic diet or certain SIBO low fermentation diets that are not necessary. If they're not causing you problems, then you can eat these foods, including things like beans and pulses, grains, fruits and vegetables. Like, they're all okay in SIBO, particularly as SIBO is a condition that you'll have for a long time. It's not going to go overnight. Therefore, you need to be eating as broad a nutritional diet with a lot of goodness in it as you can tolerate. Let's have a little think about the types of things that you can do in order to try and improve your food variety and reduce some of the fear about foods. So firstly, a good place to start is thinking about where you are right now. Make a list of all the foods that you currently eat and feel safe with. List them, if you can, in terms of fruits, vegetables, grains, proteins like meat, fish, eggs, etc., dairy, and then pulses and nuts and seeds. Like, try and keep them in little categories so that you can see in each category how many foods you are comfortable eating right now. That's a good place to start. Also, thinking about your symptoms. How would you rate your symptoms on a daily basis? Maybe you want to do this over a week. If it's to do with diarrhea, how would you rate it on a day-by-day basis? Is the bloating bad? Get a little marker in the sand for where you are right now. Because this is helpful to know. If you maintain that level of symptoms, even if they're bad, but if your symptoms stay the same, even when you're eating these foods that you've been fearing, then you may as well be eating them. Another one of those gut health bits of advice that I said in episode 100, that if you can tolerate the symptoms and they are as bad whether you're eating them or not, then you may as well be eating them. There's no reason to exclude them from your diet. So that's the first point, is take stock of where you're at. Write your list of the foods that you like, and you could just try this by writing down what you eat over a day. And then over a week, some of the foods you might notice you have them on repeat multiple times. That's okay. We're just trying to get a list of all the foods that feel okay right now. Second thing is to start to make a plan for which foods you will introduce and how. I have got a whole episode on food reintroduction, which is episode 15, about how to reintroduce food to your diet. And you might find it helpful to go back and listen to that for some more detailed advice. But in summary, in terms of food fear specifically, the things that you need to think about is how much of the food you're prepared to tolerate, and how can you incorporate it into your diet? I definitely suggest starting with a very small amount, almost just a taste of the food. A good way to start would be selecting something that is linked to foods that already feel safe for you. So, for example, if you get on okay with carrots, then another food that's quite similar to that, and it's also low FODMAP, might be parsnips or a very small amount of butternut squash. They're all like vegetables that are a little bit starchy. You can roast them. They can be very soft to eat and tasty. That's the important thing. You want to pick something that you actually want to eat, something that you think, oh yeah, I would be keen to have that in my meals. I suggest starting with foods that are low FODMAP. I do not mean that you have to go onto the low FODMAP diet if you're not already on it. But when you're selecting a new food, let's pick a food that's going to be low fermentable foods. It's not going to cause you excessive gas when you eat it in large amounts. A way to think about this is sometimes called food chaining. So you're going to pick something that's a little bit similar to what you already eat. And in this way, you are linking it with something that's safe in your mind. And that can help you overcome some of the barriers to introducing a new food. Some people I work with eat a lot of bread and wheat products. So although they are high FODMAP, if you can tolerate grains, great. You do not need to cut them out and get rid of them. But maybe another thing you could do is to try a multi-grain bread that also has some variety in the grains. Or maybe you could try a spelt bread instead. This is just slightly changing the variation in the content of the food that you're getting. It's not radically different, and that's okay. What we need to do is just get into the mindset of feeling that all foods outside your safe foods are bad. And some ways to do this is to have something that's a little bit similar. So like the carrot to parsnip jump, or you want to very slightly change what you're already eating in terms of a wheat bread into maybe a multigrain bread. These are small changes, but they can really help you to get over the hurdle of thinking that your set foods are the only foods that you can tolerate. So once you've found a food that is linked to something that you already eat and that you want to eat. Now, if you can't think of anything and you don't have any ideas, I would say pick a low FODMAP vegetable. If you're not already eating them, carrots are great because they are well tolerated and most people get on really well with them. You can cut them up and have very small pieces and just introduce it very gradually. I have also worked with people who really enjoyed eating courgettes. Now, I know a lot of people don't like courgettes anyway, or zucchini if you're in the States, but this person really enjoyed them and she found that she wanted to eat them every day, whereas a lot of people would just not like the texture. So you've got to pick something that you feel comfortable to eat and actually is something that you want to include in your diet. If you want some examples of low FODMAP fibre foods, then I have a download which I'll link to in the show notes. You can download and you can just get a little page of higher fibre, low FODMAP foods that are potentially good places for you to start. So once you've selected your food, you also want to commit to how much of it you are able to eat. If you're eating a couple of pieces of carrot, there is almost no chance that that is going to increase your symptoms, but it's possible. And so you want to take it very slowly. So I definitely suggest starting very small at whatever level you feel comfortable to. I have worked with people who've started on one blueberry or one slice of a carrot, and that was all they could manage on the first day because the fear was so strong. But with the right support, you can get past it. And I wish I could work with everybody who has this kind of food fear in IBS, because I know there are ways that you can do this. And I hope that this is motivating you in some way to start doing it for yourself. The next area, once you've got a plan, is to think about how you are going to mitigate some of those really strong fear responses when you think about eating this new food. Go back and listen to episode 48 if you haven't already, which covers breathing exercises for people with digestive issues. There are lots of examples in there and you can download them off the internet. It doesn't have to be those examples, but those are tried and tested techniques in terms of calming down your nervous system. If you think about fear itself can cause digestive issues, particularly for people with loose stools. So when we get into that state of fight or flight, our body is not prioritizing digestion. So we have these two opposing states, fight or flight and rest and digest. We definitely want to be in the rest and digest phase when you're trying something new, but that is the scary situation. So how do you get around it? Well, you have to kind of help your body override those feelings that are coming from the thoughts. You need to try and help your body calm down and slow down and tell your body that you are actually safe. Yes, you can feel a strong emotion, but you are not in a life or death situation. One of the ways we can do that is by deep breathing and careful exhalations. And these put your body into a place where you can slow down your breathing, you can slow down your pulse and your heart rate. Really trying to get yourself into a safe state makes a massive difference. In this period of trying to support yourself to introduce new foods, it's a really good idea to prioritize sleep. Make sure you're getting early nights. Are you allowing yourself an opportunity to sleep 8 hours in bed? Are you taking a walk every day to try and release some gas, to try and help your stress levels? And it also helps your sleep. Are you practicing mindful eating, where you're chewing your food really well, making sure each mouthful is really mashed up? Like, try and get yourself into a good place outside of this food reintroduction trial or challenge. And then when you actually come to eat the food, really practicing those breathing techniques, slowing yourself down, like trying to look after yourself as if you were a small child that was scared of something. Okay, you would be gentle with yourself. You wouldn't be shouting at them, telling them you should be doing this. You would be calm and gentle and trying to be the parent to yourself. So that's a nice way to think about it, is trying to acknowledge the fear and think, yes, but I need to do this. For some people, it really helps to think again of the problems that I mentioned at the beginning. I'm underweight, I'm nutritionally deficient in iron or B12 or another nutrient. I am not able to put on weight and my skin is dull, my hair is dull. I need to get past this in order to eat it. If that helps you, to motivate you, then by all means, think of those things that are driving you to eat. If it helps you to just try and eat the food whilst being distracted, that is another alternative approach. So sometimes people will say, I could only do it when I was watching TV and it just helped distract me. I got the food in, did it, and it was okay. You have to work out what's going to work for you. Most of the time, I don't suggest eating in front of the TV or whilst you're doing something else. But if it's the only way you can get the food in and it works for you, then that's okay. Final bit of advice is to try and work with someone, if you can, who really understands enough about IBS and SIBO and has a layer of understanding about your relationship with food. It's much more complex than just the biology of you eat this, therefore it gives you this symptom. When you've got a lot of food fear, it really is challenging to overcome, and you need to work with someone who understands it. If you're interested in working with me, I am experienced in working with people with IBS and SIBO, and I have been working as a nutritional therapist for 9 years, and I also have a diploma in working with people who have eating disorders. I put those links in the show notes to the other episodes as well. Go off and listen to those if you thought they might be helpful. And I'm potentially going to give the podcast a little break soon. I'm struggling at the moment whilst I'm writing my book to do a weekly episode. As you might have noticed, it's a lot less regular than it was, and I don't want to do it inconsistently. So I'm trying to make a decision about how to carry on at the moment. But you can sign up to my email list where you will get regular weekly emails, and I put out information and strategies for improving IBS and SIBO, and also share links where you can hear a bit more from me about free webinars that I'm running or other downloads that you can just get from my email list. So I'll leave it there. Thank you very much for listening to this episode of the Inside Knowledge podcast. Better digestion for everyone.